Deadly hello, if you're still alive, please click on the red subscribe button below the video. Gloomy viewing.
Ever since I can remember, I've always had to keep the bathroom light on. No matter where I was, whether at home or staying at a hotel for the night, the bathroom light had to be glowing, and the door had to be shut tight. This habit started as early as I can recall, and it's one of those peculiar routines that became a comforting ritual. The light, though often dim and sometimes flickering, provided a sense of security that I didn't quite understand but desperately needed. It was as if the steady glow was a silent guardian, warding off unseen fears that lurked in the shadows. Even on vacations or during sleepovers, this little quirk never faltered. The bathroom light would always be turned on, regardless of whether it was needed or not. In hotels, where the bathrooms were often pristine and unoccupied, I would still ensure that the light was on and the door was firmly closed. It became an unspoken rule, a small but significant way of asserting control over my environment, ensuring that the darkness never encroached too close to where I slept. My family knew about this peculiar need of mine, and while they might have found it odd, they accommodated it without much fuss. It was just one of those idiosyncrasies that made me who I am. They understood that it wasn't about being irrational or demanding. It was about a deeply ingrained need for reassurance and safety. And so, the bathroom light stayed on, and the door stayed shut tight, a small beacon in a world that could sometimes seem overwhelmingly dark. As I grew older, the reasons behind this habit were pushed to the back of my mind, but the ritual remained. It was as if that small light held a piece of my past, a comfort that persisted even as I ventured into the complexities of adulthood. It was a reminder of simpler times, of fears that had once felt insurmountable but were now just part of the backdrop of my life. So, as I walked past the bathroom before heading to bed, a sudden pang of annoyance gripped me. The familiar glow I had come to rely on wasn't there. Instead, there was an unsettling darkness beneath the shut door. I felt a knot of frustration tighten in my chest. Despite my repeated requests to Anthony, my husband, to ensure the bathroom light was left on at night, it seemed that tonight he had overlooked this small but significant detail. My agitation grew as I approached the door. The absence of light was more than just a lapse in routine. It felt like a breach of a deeply ingrained sense of security. I had always found solace in that steady glow, and now, facing the darkened bathroom, it felt as though a part of my safety net had been abruptly yanked away. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising frustration. It was a simple thing, really a light. But it symbolized so much more to me. It represented a barrier against the unknown, a buffer against the creeping shadows that had haunted my childhood and continued to lurk in the recesses of my mind. The idea of confronting that darkness, even in the form of a darkened bathroom, felt deeply unsettling. My steps felt heavy as I approached the door. I couldn't shake the sense of unease that accompanied me. I had mentioned my need for the light to be on multiple times, hoping it would become second nature for Anthony. Yet, here I was, standing before the closed door, feeling a growing sense of irritation mixed with a hint of dread. I had trusted that this small request would be honored, but the absence of that reassuring light made me question whether my comfort was being dismissed as trivial. As I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment, staring at the faint outline of the shut door in the gloom of the hallway. The lack of light seemed almost like a challenge, an invitation to confront whatever I had tried so hard to avoid. I knew that it was only a matter of flicking a switch, but the act felt like a symbolic step into the very darkness I had spent so long avoiding. With a quick, resolute breath, I took a step closer to the door. My heart pounded louder than usual, a mix of irritation and trepidation fueling my every move. I pressed my ear against the cold surface of the door, straining to catch any sounds that might indicate what lay beyond. My breathing was shallow, My senses heightened as I listened intently for any indication of movement or an unsettling noise on the other side. The silence was profound and absolute. It felt as though the entire house had held its breath, waiting for me to act. I held my ear pressed firmly against the door, trying to pierce through the stillness. After a moment, when the only sound was the soft hum of the night outside, I took it as a sign that there was nothing immediately alarming awaiting me in the darkness. Taking another steadying breath, I grasped the doorknob. The metal felt cool and unyielding under my fingers as I turned it cautiously. The familiar click of the latch disengaging sounded louder than usual in the stillness of the house. I pushed the door open slowly, wincing as it creaked on its hinges, a sound that seemed unusually loud in the quiet. As the door inched open, a sliver of the bathroom's interior was revealed to me. My eyes darted nervously around the darkened room, trying to acclimate to the subdued light cast by the moon filtering through the window. The soft, sullen light did little to banish the shadows that loomed ominously in the corners of the room. It created an eerie interplay of darkness and light, enhancing the sense of foreboding that gripped me. I stepped through the threshold, every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet magnified in the oppressive silence. The darkness of the bathroom seemed almost to swallow the moonlight, casting long, distorted shadows that danced menacingly across the tiles. My heart beat in sync with the tension in the room, each step forward feeling like an intrusion into a space that had been left untouched by the reassuring glow of the bathroom light. I pulled in a quick, sharp breath as I stepped through the doorway and into the bathroom. The shift from the dim hallway to the muted glow of moonlight felt jarring. The bathroom, bathed in the ghostly light of the moon, was cloaked in a somber, almost spectral illumination. Though the moonlight was bright enough to cast faint outlines, it did little to dispel the oppressive darkness that clung to every surface. The room was shrouded in an eerie twilight, the light from the moon filtering through the frosted window and casting a pallid glow across the space. The shadows seemed to stretch and writhe, exaggerating every corner and crevice into dark, menacing forms. The bathroom, usually a place of mundane routines, now felt like an alien landscape, distorted and unfamiliar. As I made my way further inside, the floor creaked underfoot with an unnerving prominence. Each sound seemed to echo unnaturally loud in the quiet of the night, amplifying my sense of unease. The usual comforting hum of the bathroom, familiar and benign, was replaced by an almost accusatory silence, broken only by the sporadic creaks of the floorboards. The shadows, elongated and exaggerated by the feeble moonlight, danced ominously across the walls and floor. They moved with a life of their own, casting tall, sinister shapes that seemed to mimic the worst of my fears. The room felt alive with an unsettling presence, each flicker of shadow a reminder of the unsettling feeling that had settled in my chest. I glanced around, my eyes darting nervously. The usual reassuring features of the bathroom seemed to be swallowed by the dark. The familiar shapes of the sink, the tub, and the toilet loomed in the gloom, their outlines barely discernible. The contrast between the gentle moonlight and the encroaching shadows only heightened the sense of dread that accompanied me. Taking a step closer, I felt an unsettling stillness envelop me, making the walk to the light switch feel interminable. The familiar doorway to the toilet seemed to stretch and distort in the dim moonlight, its edges elongating into an abyss of shadow. Every inch felt like a mile, and each step I took was accompanied by the faint, almost imperceptible creaking of the floor beneath me. I held my breath, a mix of dread and determination gnawing in my stomach as I approached the cool, slick surface of the washing machine. Its cold, metallic presence felt almost menacing in the darkness. The washer stood as an immovable sentinel in the corner of the room, its usual comforting presence now twisted into a dark, oppressive force. The chill of its surface seemed to seep into the surrounding air, heightening my sense of unease. Inwardly, I cursed Anthony for turning off the light, my frustration mingling with my fear. The bathroom, a place that was supposed to be ordinary and unremarkable, had been transformed into a chamber of shadows and uncertainty. The absence of the light felt like a cruel betrayal, amplifying every creak and rustle into a potential threat. My eyes darted around frantically, searching for any sign of life, whether it be a tangible presence or something more spectral. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift with a mind of their own, distorting the familiar shapes of the room into unfamiliar, eerie forms. Every slight movement or flicker of shadow was scrutinized, my heart racing with every small sound or change in the dark. I edged closer to the light switch, my nerves frayed and my senses heightened. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in around me, and the task of reaching the switch felt Herculean in its difficulty. My breath came in shallow, rapid gasps as I fought against the creeping fear that threatened to overwhelm me. Each step toward the switch felt like a battle against the encroaching shadows, and I silently willed myself to make it to the sanctuary of light. I crept closer to the light switch, each movement deliberate and cautious. The bathroom seemed to grow more menacing with every step I took. The shower curtains, which were once a comforting cream color, adorned with gentle biblical script and soft flying birds, had been transformed into a mass of inky darkness. Their once familiar patterns were now obscured by a dense, impenetrable blackness that seemed to absorb the scant light from the moon. The curtains appeared to sag heavily, like a shroud concealing whatever might be lurking behind them. The sight of the darkened shower curtain sent a chill down my spine. What should have been a benign everyday object now felt like a veil hiding some unspeakable horror. The contrast between the inky darkness of the curtain and the faint, sullen glow of the moonlight made it difficult to discern any shapes or movements within the room. My eyes strained to pierce through the darkness, but the shadows remained stubbornly opaque, concealing any secrets that lay beyond. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the light switch. The anticipation was almost unbearable, each second stretching into an eternity as I fought the rising tide of anxiety. With a swift, decisive motion, I flicked the switch up. The sudden burst of artificial light filled the room, casting away the menacing shadows and illuminating the space with a harsh, bright glow. As the light flickered to life, a wave of relief washed over me. The oppressive darkness receded, revealing the familiar outlines of our bathroom. The shadows that had seemed so threatening now lay harmlessly against the walls. The sense of dread that had gripped me melted away, replaced by a more manageable unease. The bathroom, once a domain of fear, was now just a room again, albeit one still shadowed by the unsettling memory of the darkness that had preceded it. I took a deep breath, feeling my nerves gradually calm down. The harsh light exposed the benign, everyday objects of the bathroom, the sink, the mirror, and the now non-threatening shower curtain. The transformation from dark to light had dispelled the illusion of danger, restoring a semblance of normalcy. I sighed with relief, grateful for the return of clarity and the reassurance that came with it. I shuffled out of the bathroom, my steps slow and deliberate as I tried to shake off the lingering sense of unease. A yawn escaped my lips, and I felt the weight of exhaustion pulling heavily on my eyelids. The routine of navigating the house at night, from the bathroom to the bedroom, seemed almost dreamlike, as though I were moving through a half-remembered fog. The journey across the living room felt longer than usual. Each step seemed to echo in the silent house, the soft creaks of the floorboards the only sound breaking the heavy silence. The living room, normally a comforting space filled with familiar furniture and warm colors, now seemed to be a stretch of darkness between me and the sanctuary of sleep. The shadows clung to the corners and edges, casting odd shapes that played tricks on my tired mind. As I crossed into the bedroom, the contrast was stark. The room was engulfed in a profound darkness, the kind that seemed almost alive. The blackness felt deeper here, as if the room itself had become a vast, inky void, capable of swallowing anything within its grasp. The familiar outlines of the furniture were obscured, and the shadows danced erratically, creating an unsettling spectacle of shifting shapes and angles. The depth of the darkness was almost palpable, pressing in on me as I moved further into the room. The oppressive quality of the blackness was disorienting. It felt like a thick, almost tangible fog that enveloped the space, making it hard to distinguish where the shadows ended and the darkness began. My senses were on high alert as I tried to navigate through the room, the sense of being swallowed by the shadows amplifying my fatigue and anxiety. The darkness seemed to stretch infinitely, threatening to engulf me completely. Despite the comforting familiarity of the bed, the journey through the shadowy room felt like a passage through an alien landscape. I longed for the warmth and security of sleep, yet the deepening darkness made it feel as though I were venturing further away from the safety I sought. Each step felt heavy, laden with the weight of exhaustion and the lingering echoes of the night's unsettling experiences. As I finally reached the bed, I collapsed onto it with a sigh of relief. The bed, though familiar, seemed to offer only a temporary reprieve from the pervasive sense of unease. I pulled the covers over myself, trying to find solace in their warmth, but the shadows of the night still loomed in the periphery of my vision, reminding me of the dark and unsettling journey that had led me here. I remember why I keep the light on. It takes me back to a night from my childhood, a night that still echoes in my memory with haunting clarity. I had been scared, the kind of fear that creeps up when you're young and alone in the dark. The night had been particularly unsettling, and I had sought comfort in the familiar sanctuary of my parents' bedroom. But as I tiptoed through the dimly lit house, my small feet padding softly against the cool floor, I passed by the bathroom door. That night, the bathroom door was slightly ajar, and the darkness beyond seemed to seep out like ink spilling from a bottle. The blackness was so dense that it appeared almost alive, as if it were reaching out, ready to engulf anything that dared to approach. My 5-year-old curiosity got the better of me. With a mixture of dread and intrigue, I gently pulled the bathroom door open just enough to peek inside. What I saw through the narrow crack in the door is burned into my memory. The bathroom was a cavern of shadows, the moonlight filtering through the window, creating eerie patterns on the walls. But it wasn't the shapes that frightened me. It was her. She stood in the middle of the bathroom, her presence casting an unnerving silhouette against the sparse light. At first, she was merely an outline, a dark, formless figure in the gloom. But as I continued to stare, the details of her form began to emerge. Her face, slick and eerily illuminated by the faint moonlight, was an unsettling shade of pallid gray. Her hair hung in tangled, matted clumps, as if it had not been brushed or cared for in ages. Her eyes, deep and dark, held a foreboding intensity that seemed to bore into my very soul. The terror I felt in that moment was overwhelming. She turned slowly towards me, her face contorted into a grotesque expression of malice. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel a chill race down my spine as she began to move. Her arms extended toward me, her fingers outstretched in a haunting gesture of grasping. She let out a piercing shriek, a sound that cut through the silence like a jagged blade. The noise was so primal and full of rage that it seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. In that instant, fear took hold of me with a vice-like grip. I bolted from the bathroom, my small legs carrying me as fast as they could towards the safety of my parents' room. My cries and sobs mixed with the adrenaline-fueled sprint, and I remember the frantic pounding of my heart as I stumbled into their room, a blubbering mess of snot and tears. I recounted the nightmarish vision I had seen, my words tumbling out in a chaotic flood. My parents, though groggy and bewildered from being abruptly woken, listened with a mixture of concern and disbelief. Yet, despite their initial skepticism, I saw a shift in their expressions, a silent understanding and acceptance of the fear I had conveyed. From that night onward, the bathroom door remained closed and the light was left on. It was a simple ritual born out of necessity, a safeguard against the shadows that had once held such terrifying power over me. And now, as an adult, that childhood fear persists. The memory of that night has become a part of me, a constant reminder of why the bathroom light must stay on. The darkness holds a weight of its own, a sinister potential that I cannot ignore. The light, however dim, is a barrier against the inkiness that once bled out from that cracked door, a fragile shield against the haunting specter of my childhood. She was facing away from me, her figure outlined against the darkened bathroom. The moonlight that filtered through the small window cast a faint, eerie glow, creating a stark contrast between the shadows and the meager illumination. Her silhouette was sharp, yet it wavered slightly, as if the light itself was struggling to define her form. The shadowy edges of her figure seemed almost to shimmer and blur, giving her an otherworldly, unsettling appearance. I stood frozen, my small frame barely making a sound as I peered through the crack in the door. Curiosity battled with fear, and though every instinct screamed for me to turn away, I couldn't tear my gaze from the figure in the bathroom. She remained motionless, standing still in the center of the room as if rooted to the spot. The stillness of the moment was thick, laden with a sense of impending dread that seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. The longer I watched, the more details I could make out. Her posture was rigid, almost unnatural, as though she were frozen in time. The moonlight played tricks with her form, casting strange, elongated shadows that danced and shifted on the walls and floor. My heart pounded in my chest, a relentless drumbeat that threatened to burst through my ribs, but my fascination held me captive. Then, without warning, she began to turn towards me. The movement was slow, deliberate, and filled with an unnerving grace. As she rotated, the moonlight finally caught her face in full. What I saw made my blood run cold. Her face was pale and gaunt, the skin stretched tight over her features in a way that seemed almost skeletal. The moonlight illuminated her features in a ghostly glow, emphasizing the sickly pallor of her complexion. Her eyes, those dark, soulless orbs, locked onto mine with a gaze that was both piercing and chilling. They were deep-set and unnervingly wide, holding a dark intensity that seemed to bore into my very being. The eyes were unsettlingly empty, yet filled with a kind of malevolent intent that sent shivers crawling down my spine. As she continued to face me, the rest of her figure emerged from the shadows. Her hair hung in tangled, matted clumps, cascading down her back and shoulders like a dark waterfall. It was as though she had emerged from a place untouched by time, her appearance a grotesque mockery of life. Her mouth, slightly agape, was set in a grim, unnatural expression that only deepened the horror of her appearance. And then she began to move towards me. The motion was swift, her arms reaching out with an unsettling, almost inhuman speed. The air seemed to crackle with tension as she stretched out her fingers, the outstretched limbs conveying a sense of urgency and malevolence. Her mouth opened wider, emitting a shriek that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the house. It was a sound filled with raw, unrestrained fury, a primal cry that echoed the depths of her anguish or rage. I felt a jolt of fear so intense it nearly paralyzed me. In that moment, the combination of her eerie appearance, the bone-chilling sound of her scream, and the horrifying realization that she was coming for me became too much to bear. I stumbled back from the door, my instincts kicking in as I turned and fled. The image of her outstretched arms, and that haunting, unblinking stare was burned into my memory, a permanent scar left by that nightmarish encounter. Her face was slick, with an unsettling sheen, almost as if it were coated in a thin layer of sweat, or something far more sinister. The moonlight, casting its cold, silvery glow through the bathroom window, accentuated the sickly pallor of her skin, making it appear translucent and unnaturally smooth. It was as if the light itself recoiled from the grotesque reality of her appearance, illuminating her in a harsh, clinical manner that only deepened the horror. Her hair, a tangled mass of inky black strands, fell in chaotic disarray around her face and shoulders. The moonlight caught in the knots and clumps, creating an almost shimmering effect that contrasted sharply with the dark, oppressive nature of her presence. Each strand seemed to writhe and twist, as if possessing a life of its own, adding to the disturbing visual of her appearance. The hair, once a sign of beauty or normalcy, now seemed like an extension of her malevolent aura, contributing to the overall sense of dread. Her eyes, however, were the most chilling aspect of her visage. They were dark, almost black, with a depth that seemed to swallow any light that touched them. Those eyes, void of emotion, yet filled with a terrifying, predatory awareness, snapped towards me with a swift, almost unnatural precision. It was as if they had been waiting for this moment, tracking my every movement with a malevolent focus that sent a chill racing through my veins. Without warning, she let out a blood-curdling shriek, a sound so raw and primal that it seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. The scream echoed through the bathroom, reverberating off the tiled walls and filling the small space with a suffocating sense of terror. The intensity of the scream was overwhelming, a cry that seemed to pierce the very core of my being and paralyze me with fear. Her arms, stretched out in a grotesque parody of a welcoming embrace, reached towards me with a disturbing, jerky motion. The limbs seemed to move with a speed and grace that defied their unnatural appearance, extending towards me with a reach that was both horrifying and relentless. As she began to run, the movement was jarring, a swift, almost unearthly rush that closed the distance between us with alarming speed. The way her body twisted and contorted in her approach was unnatural, her movements lacking any semblance of human grace, and instead taking on an eerie, otherworldly quality. In that moment, my fear reached a fever pitch. The combination of her horrifying appearance, the chilling shriek, and the relentless advance of her outstretched arms created a nightmarish tableau that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I could feel the primal instinct to flee surge through me, and without a second thought, I turned and bolted towards the safety of my parents' room, my heart pounding in my chest, and my mind reeling from the terror of what I had just witnessed. The vision of her slick, sickly skin, her tangled hair, and those dark, unblinking eyes was seared into my memory, a permanent scar left by that horrifying encounter. The scream, the outstretched arms, and the speed of her advance were etched into my mind, leaving me with a profound sense of dread that would linger long after I had escaped her grasp. I somehow managed to make it to my parents' room, my legs moving on autopilot as my mind was consumed by sheer, unrelenting fear. My heart raced wildly, a frantic drumbeat in my chest that seemed to drown out all other sounds. I was a blubbering mess, my face streaked with tears and snot, my breath coming in ragged, gasping sobs that barely allowed me to form coherent words. The terror I had experienced felt like an invisible weight pressing down on me, and I struggled to convey the horror of what I had seen. As I burst into their room, the sudden intrusion startled my parents from their sleep. Their groggy, disoriented faces turned towards me, and I could see the confusion and alarm in their eyes. The room, which had been a sanctuary of calm and comfort, was now filled with the chaos of my emotional breakdown. My mother, her hair in disarray and her eyes wide with concern, immediately reached out to me, pulling me close in an attempt to soothe my trembling form. My father, still half asleep, but clearly alarmed, sat up in bed, his expression shifting from confusion to a serious, attentive focus. Despite their initial bewilderment, I could also see a flash of understanding in their eyes. It was as if, beneath the surface of their initial shock, they recognized the depth of my fear and the genuine terror that I was trying to articulate. The wildness in their looks began to give way to a softer, more compassionate gaze as they listened to my frantic account. I could see the shift in their demeanor, a silent communication that conveyed their realization that something profoundly disturbing had occurred. I recounted the details of the night, my words tumbling out in a jumbled rush. Between gasps and sobs, I described the darkness of the bathroom, the eerie stillness, and the horrifying apparition I had encountered. My voice trembled as I relayed how the figure had turned towards me, her ghastly face illuminated by the moonlight, and how she had shrieked and reached for me with her outstretched arms. The fear and helplessness I had felt were conveyed through my trembling voice and tear-streaked face, making my parents' concern deepen with each word I spoke. My parents exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of concern and something akin to grim acceptance. They were no longer just reacting to the panic of their child. They were grappling with the unsettling reality of what I had described. My mother's arms tightened around me, her embrace a fragile shield against the lingering terror of the night. My father, his brow furrowed in thought, looked both resolute and contemplative, as if he were trying to reconcile my nightmarish tale with his own understanding of the world. It was then that I saw the wash of understanding cross their faces, a silent acknowledgement of the fear that had taken hold of me. They had always been my protectors, my safe haven, and in that moment, their recognition of my terror was both a comfort and a reminder of the gravity of what I had experienced. The understanding in their eyes was accompanied by a resolute determination to address whatever had caused me such profound distress. It was clear that they knew this was not just a figment of a child's imagination, but something that had shaken me to my very core. As my parents calmed me down, their soothing words and gentle reassurances provided a small measure of relief, though the image of that horrifying figure remained vividly etched in my mind. The terror of that night was far from over, but in the comfort of my parents' presence, I found a fleeting sense of security, even as the shadows of the bathroom and the figure within them continued to haunt my thoughts. From that day forward, the bathroom door was kept firmly closed, and the light was left on, a steadfast guardian against the encroaching darkness. My parents were diligent about maintaining this ritual, ensuring that the light remained a constant beacon throughout the night. The routine became a part of our nightly lives, a protective measure that kept the shadows at bay. The simple act of keeping the light on was a small but potent reassurance against the fears that had once taken hold of me. But as anyone who has ever faced their fears knows, the solution isn't always foolproof. Every so often, the power would falter a brief flicker, a momentary dimming of the lights. These small failures in the electrical system were enough to set my nerves on edge. The bathroom light, which had always been a symbol of safety and normalcy, would flicker and dim, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally. During these fleeting moments of darkness, something else would happen. I would see it, feet planted firmly just beyond the closed door, a grim reminder of the fear I had hoped to leave behind. The nails, long, jagged, and unmistakably human, would scratch slowly, deliberately, down the surface of the door. The sound was a chilling, creaking rasp that seemed to resonate through the quiet of the night. The noise was haunting, a spectral echo that sent shivers down my spine and rekindled the terror of that long-ago night. And then, in those brief interludes of darkness, the voice would come. It was a scratchy, grating whisper, laden with malevolence. The voice was unmistakably clear, cutting through the silence with its chilling clarity. It was always the same, a singular, haunting utterance that seemed to pierce through the fabric of reality itself. Loralee. The name echoed in the stillness, a sinister reminder of the figure that had once haunted my childhood nightmares. The way the name was drawn out, the rasp of the voice, and the unmistakable sense of menace behind each utterance were enough to make my blood run cold. It was as though the voice carried with it a malevolent intent, a grim promise that the darkness had not been banished, but merely bided its time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Each time the lights flickered and the voice appeared, the fear I had hoped to overcome surged back with renewed intensity. It was a relentless reminder that the shadows were never truly vanquished, merely waiting for a moment of vulnerability to reassert their presence. The bathroom, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground between light and darkness, where every flicker of the lights and every scratch against the door reignited the terror that had been buried deep within me. Despite my attempts to move past the fear and live my life with the lights on and the door closed, these moments of darkness served as a cruel reminder of the terror that had once consumed me. The voice, the scratches, and the flickering light were all part of a relentless cycle, a haunting presence that refused to be ignored. The battle between light and dark continued, each flicker of the bathroom light a stark reminder that the darkness was always waiting just beyond reach, ready to remind me of the fears that had never truly left.